Forget everything you've heard about Peter Magyar being the pro-EU savior who would mindlessly follow every directive from the Berlaymont building. While the world was busy celebrating the fall of Viktor Orban's 16-year regime on April 12th, 2026, a new, even more unpredictable storm was brewing. Peter Magyar has just sent a shockwave through the European landscape by saying a definitive, cold no to Ursula von der Leyen. This isn't just a disagreement, it is a geopolitical earthquake. For weeks, the narrative was simple. Magyar wins, the 21 billion euros in frozen funds flows, and Hungary returns to the liberal fold. But the reality is far more explosive. By rejecting von der Leyen's core demands in the very week he was supposed to finalize the grand deal, Magyar has proven he is not a puppet of the European Commission. He isn't just playing the game, he's rewriting the rules. We are witnessing a high-stakes betrayal, or perhaps a masterstroke of nationalist survival. Magyar knows that if he yields too much on the EU migration pact or the specific judicial reforms dictated by Brussels, he becomes the very Brussels lackey that Orban's propaganda machine warned about. He is trapped between a desperate need for cash to fix a crippled Hungarian economy and the political necessity of maintaining his Hungary first image. The unbelievable truth is that the man who was supposed to heal the rift with Europe has just widened it into a chasm. This is no longer a transition of power. It is a declaration of sovereign war. Ursula von der Leyen expected a handshake and a signature. Instead, she got a closed door and a list of non-negotiable demands that have left EU officials in a state of absolute panic. The stakes could not be higher. We are talking about 21 billion euros, roughly 5 trillion Hungarian forints, hanging by a thread. This is the inheritance Peter Magyar received after his landslide victory on April 12th, 2026, where his TISA party secured a staggering 141 seats in the National Assembly. But this victory came with a poison pill. The European Commission, led by a cautious Ursula von der Leyen, has kept the vault locked. They are not just asking for reforms, they are demanding a total dismantling of the system that kept Orban in power for 16 years. Specifically, von der Leyen is wielding the 27 super milestones like a political guillotine. These aren't just suggestions. They include total judicial independence, a complete overhaul of the National Judicial Council, anti-corruption crackdowns, demands that Hungary join the European Public Prosecutor's Office, EPPO, immediately, the Academic Freedom Act, and reversing the privatization of Hungarian universities. But here is where the unbelievable part happens. On April 29th, 2026, during a high-tension meeting in Brussels, Magyar did something no one expected. He didn't just nod and agree. He looked von der Leyen in the eye and signaled selective non-compliance. While the Western media painted him as a pro-EU puppet, Magyar knows his survival depends on Hungarian voters who are still deeply skeptical of Brussels' interference. The most explosive point of contention is the EU migration pact. Brussels wants Hungary to start processing asylum seekers or pay a massive solidarity fine estimated at 1 million euros per day. Magyar's response: a cold, hard no. He has publicly stated that he will not allow Hungary to become a refugee camp, essentially adopting the very rhetoric he once criticized Orban for. This is a masterclass in political tightrope walking. Magyar is using the 21 billion euros as leverage rather than being leveraged by it. He knows the EU needs Hungary to be a success story to prove that liberal democracy can defeat illiberalism. If Hungary collapses economically under his watch because Brussels refused to release the funds, it would be a catastrophic failure for von der Leyen's legacy. The drama reached its peak this week when Magyar announced he would return to Brussels on May 25th, 2026, for a final showdown. He isn't going there to beg, he is going there to demand the release of the 10 billion euro recovery fund, RRF, before the August deadline without bowing to the migration pact. Inside sources at the Berlaymont building described the atmosphere as toxic. Von der Leyen is reportedly furious that her golden boy of the Hungarian opposition has turned into a formidable sovereigntist overnight. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about who truly holds power in Central Europe. Is Peter Magyar the man who saved Hungary from Orban only to become a new, more sophisticated headache for the European Union? The numbers don't lie. 10% of Hungary's GDP is currently frozen. If Magyar doesn't get that money, his new Hungary project dies in its tracks. But if he gives in, he loses his base. He's playing a game of chicken with the most powerful woman in Europe, and so far, he hasn't blinked. We are no longer looking at a simple diplomatic disagreement. we are witnessing a fundamental shift in the tectonic plates of European power. The unbelievable reality of May 2026 is that Peter Magyar has done the unthinkable. He has taken the hope of millions of pro-EU Hungarians and the expectations of the Berlaymont elite and set them on fire. This isn't just about a policy dispute, it is about the very definition of what it means to be a European leader in an era of crumbling certainties. The irony is thick enough to choke on. For over a decade, the European Commission prayed for the end of the Orbán era, convinced that any successor would be a compliant, grateful partner who would exchange national sovereignty for the sweet flow of euro subsidies. They expected a puppet. Instead, they got a master of the game. Peter Magyar isn't just refusing to sign, he is systematically dismantling the EU's leverage, proving that he understands the internal machinery of Brussels far better than the bureaucrats who run it. If Magyar successfully forces Ursula von der Leyen to release the 21 billion euros without yielding on the migration pact or the core judicial red lines, he will have achieved a victory that Viktor Orbán could only dream of. He will have proven that a nation can remain inside the club, take the club's money, and still defy the club's rules. But the risk is catastrophic. We are standing on a knife's edge. If von der Leyen holds the line, if she decides to make an example out of Magyar to prevent a sovereigntist contagion from spreading to France or Germany, the Hungarian economy could face a total blackout by midsummer. This is the ultimate moment of truth for the European project. Can the European Union survive a leader who uses the language of democracy and rule of law to shield a nationalist agenda? Is Peter Magyar the Trojan horse of Hungarian sovereignty, or is he a desperate politician cornered by a failing economy, playing a game of all or nothing with the survival of 10 million people? The events we are seeing right now are not just news. They are a declaration of war against the status quo. Now, the floor is yours, and the world is watching your response. Did Peter Magyar just commit political suicide, or is he the only man in Europe with the backbone to stand up to the Brussels dictate while keeping his democratic credentials intact? Is Ursula von der Leyen's rigidity justified to protect the Union's values, or is she about to push Hungary into a permanent economic alliance with the East out of pure spite? And the most explosive question of all, did the West just help overthrow a dictator only to replace him with a rebel they can neither predict nor control? The honeymoon is over. The era of predictable politics has been buried in the streets of Budapest. The Magyar defiance is the new reality, and it is more dangerous, more volatile, and more unbelievable than anything we have seen in the last 20 years. Leave your comments below. Tell us if you think this is a masterstroke of genius or a fatal mistake that will haunt Hungary for generations. The ripple effects of this confrontation are already spreading far beyond Budapest. In Berlin, Paris, and even Washington, policymakers are watching this standoff with growing unease, because what happens next could redefine the balance of power inside the European Union for years to come. If Peter Magyar succeeds, he doesn't just secure funds for Hungary, he creates a blueprint for every other member state that has quietly resented Brussels' growing authority. Countries that have so far complied with EU directives may begin to reconsider their positions, calculating whether they too can push back without facing economic consequences. This is how a single act of defiance can evolve into a continent-wide shift. But the European Commission understands this risk all too well. That is precisely why Ursula von der Leyen cannot afford to appear weak. If she backs down now, it sends a signal that the EU's conditions are negotiable under pressure, that rules can be bent by those willing to test the limits. For Brussels, this is no longer just about Hungary, it is about preserving the credibility of the entire European project. The standoff has become symbolic, almost existential. Authority versus sovereignty. Integration versus independence. Meanwhile, inside Hungary, the pressure on Magyar is intensifying by the day. The economy remains fragile, investor confidence is shaky, and ordinary citizens are beginning to feel the strain of uncertainty. Inflation, public spending constraints, and stalled development projects are all tied directly or indirectly to the frozen EU funds. Every passing week, without a resolution, tightens the noose. Magyar must deliver results, and fast. But every concession he makes risks eroding the very political identity that brought him to power. This is where the situation becomes truly volatile, because when a leader is cornered between economic collapse and political survival, the decisions they make are rarely cautious or predictable. They are bold, risky, and sometimes irreversible. Magyar may escalate his rhetoric further, doubling down on sovereignty and framing Brussels as an external adversary. Or he could attempt a strategic compromise, offering limited reforms that give von der Leyen just enough to justify releasing part of the funds. Either path carries enormous consequences. And then there is the geopolitical wildcard, the East. If Brussels continues to hold the line and Hungary's financial situation deteriorates, the temptation to seek alternative partnerships will grow stronger, whether through trade, energy deals, or financial cooperation. Shifting even partially toward Eastern alliances would mark a dramatic pivot in Hungary's foreign policy. It would also represent a strategic failure for the European Union, effectively pushing a member state away rather than keeping it aligned. What makes this moment so extraordinary is that there are no easy outcomes left. Every possible resolution comes with a cost. A compromise weakens Brussels. A standoff risks Hungary's economy. And escalation threatens unity. This is not politics as usual. This is a high-stakes power struggle where every move reshapes the board. As the May 25th showdown approaches, the tension is reaching a breaking point. Behind closed doors, negotiations are likely ongoing, messages being sent through diplomatic back channels, and contingency plans being drafted on both sides. But publicly, neither side is showing any sign of retreat. The rhetoric is hardening, the positions are solidifying, and the clock is ticking. History often turns on moments like this, moments where one decision, one meeting, one refusal to compromise can alter the trajectory of an entire region. Whether Peter Magyar emerges as a strategic genius or a cautionary tale will depend entirely on what happens next. And right now, that outcome is more uncertain than ever. And as this crisis deepens, another layer is beginning to emerge, one that goes beyond politics, beyond economics, and into the realm of perception and narrative control. Because in modern Europe, power is not only exercised through institutions and funding mechanisms, it is also shaped by the stories people believe. Right now, two completely different narratives are being constructed in real time. In Brussels, this is being framed as a necessary stand for the rule of law, a line that cannot be crossed without consequences. Officials argue that the integrity of the union depends on enforcing standards equally, regardless of who is in power in any member state. From this perspective, Magyar's defiance is not bold leadership. It is a dangerous precedent that threatens the legal and moral foundation of the EU itself. But inside Hungary, a very different story is gaining traction. There, this confrontation is increasingly portrayed as a fight for national dignity, a resistance against external pressure, and a refusal to be dictated to by unelected bureaucrats. This narrative is powerful, emotionally charged, and politically effective. It transforms a financial dispute into a question of identity, sovereignty, and pride. And once politics reaches that level, compromise becomes exponentially harder. This is the invisible battlefield where this conflict may ultimately be decided, not in courtrooms, not in conference rooms, but in the minds of millions of people watching, reacting, and choosing which version of reality they believe. If Magyar successfully convinces Hungarians that he is standing up for them against Brussels, he strengthens his position regardless of the economic pain. If von der Leyen convinces the rest of Europe that she is defending core values against backsliding, she solidifies her authority even if negotiations stall. And then comes the domino effect. Because other leaders across Europe are not just observing this situation, they are learning from it. Quietly, carefully, they are analyzing every move, every statement, every concession. They are asking themselves a simple but profound question. How far can you push Brussels before it pushes back? The answer to that question could redefine the internal dynamics of the European Union more than any treaty or reform package ever could. At the same time, financial markets are beginning to factor in the uncertainty. Investors dislike instability, and Hungary is now seen as a potential flashpoint. Currency fluctuations, bond yields, and investment flows are all sensitive to the outcome of this standoff. If confidence drops too far, the economic consequences could arrive faster than any political solution, forcing decisions under pressure rather than strategy. What makes the situation even more precarious is that both sides are now locked into positions that are difficult to reverse without appearing to lose. Magyar cannot suddenly comply without damaging his credibility. Von der Leyen cannot suddenly concede without weakening the Commission's authority. This is the classic trap of high-stakes politics, when the cost of backing down becomes greater than the cost of continuing forward, even if forward leads to collision. So the question is no longer whether there will be a resolution, but what kind of resolution it will be. Will it be a quiet, face-saving compromise crafted behind closed doors, a dramatic public confrontation that forces a winner and a loser, or a prolonged stalemate that slowly drains both sides while reshaping the political landscape around them? One thing is certain, the outcome of this conflict will not stay contained within Hungary. It will echo across Europe, influencing elections, policies, and alliances in ways that are impossible to fully predict right now. This is not just a national story or even a regional one. It is a defining chapter in the ongoing struggle over what the European Union is and what it will become. And as the countdown continues, the sense of inevitability grows stronger. Something will give. The only question left is who and at what cost.